What's up, everybody? You are listening to the Think Big podcast. I'm your host, Ayelet Polonsky. This podcast is designed to help you create a manifestation mindset by learning how to think big, to question your old way of thinking and recreate the neural pathways necessary to live a life wilder than you've ever thought possible. We're here to have raw, vulnerable, and courageous conversations with big personalities to get behind the scenes and find out what their secrets to manifesting are. I am humbled to have this opportunity to guide you towards a more meaningful life. If you enjoy this episode, please share the love, share it with a friend or family member, and don't forget to subscribe for weekly updates. Let's get into today's episode. And as always, happy manifesting.
Wow. So the biggest thing that people come to you with is anxiety. Is there a percentage of how many people in the world experience anxiety?
Yeah, they did like a study recently post-COVID, and I think it was 1 in 4 adults in the United States either were suffering from symptoms of anxiety or depression. So I don't know the exact number about anxiety right now, but 1 in 4. So that means if you're sitting in a room with your mom, your sister, and your best friend, 1 and likely 2 of you are suffering from clinical symptoms of anxiety or depression, which is a crazy high number. And it's not something that people talk about, especially when it comes to like clinically, because they're like, oh my God, I'm so anxious. But now like I have diagnostic criteria for an anxiety disorder right now, help me through it, So it's something that so many of us are dealing with all the time.
Now, when you say like 1 in 4 though, because, I imagine that every single person experiences anxiety, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For sure. I mean, it's an emotion.
It's an emotion. Anxiety is an emotion.
Fear is a human emotion. We started off having this experience of fear, however many years ago when we were, hunting and gathering, and we would see a bear, and we would feel fear, and our body would say, time to run away. We would run away. So fear is actually a pretty functional emotion in life. It's helpful for us, but I think we've turned it into anxiety because we don't know exactly what to do with it. And fear kind of took on like a life of its own. And I would say like untethered fear can become anxiety very quickly. And that's, I think, what a lot of people are dealing with right now.
Uh-huh. So when you say fear, because I'm like, okay, I've also heard that fear and excitement come from the same place, right? So how do we tell the difference? How do we know, is it fear? Is it excitement? Can I reroute my fear in order to like label it as excitement so it doesn't really feel as scary?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that what you're referring to is that similar systems inside of us get activated. So our fight or flight mode can get activated and we can be like, oh my gosh, there's like so much happening inside of me right now. I think with like most emotions, it's about where they take you. If you have sadness because you need to grieve, that sadness is very effective. But if you have sadness that's keeping you stuck in your bed for months on end, that sadness is no longer helping you in your life. You got to do something else with it. So if your system is like excited and there's like a tiny little bit of nervousness because you're taking a risk, fabulous. Go for it. Like let that fear happen and embrace it with everything you've got and just like take a plunge, take a risk. But if it's a fear that's stopping you from taking a risk or stopping you from doing something that you love or that you really ideally would want to do, then that's an emotion that we would want to work through so that we can get to that, whatever that end point is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I feel like a lot of this is easier said than done. I do a lot of public speaking and it's like people think that I do it and I have no emotion associated. I get on a stage and I make it look natural and thank God, okay, that's after like years and years and years of practice. But it doesn't mean that inside my internal world, I'm not feeling big feelings. Like before a big speech, I can't sleep the night before. Sometimes it takes me hours to fall asleep because the feelings are so big. And like my husband's always like, can I make you dinner before your talk? I'm like, no way. I don't eat before any of my events. Like, what is that? Like, what is happening in my body, in our bodies when we're experiencing like, whether it's fear, whether it's excitement, like why does it shut down like our ability to sleep, to eat? What's happening?
First of all, thank you for sharing that experience with us. I think so many of us feel that and it's like, doesn't have to be taboo. We're so human. Like, I speak and I get nervous before I speak. It could be great. Welcome to the human race.
Right.
But I think, and I thank you for normalizing it, because obviously you're here on Instagram and you're talking to people and you seem like everything is so natural. But to know that you have that experience prior is so important, I think, for a lot of people. But I think what happens in most of us is that whenever we put ourselves out there, we feel fear. We don't want to feel rejected. We don't want to feel like maybe I'm going to mess up. Maybe I'm not going to say something, correctly. Maybe I'm going to lose my flow. Maybe the audience is not going to accept me. There's so much, on the line whenever we public speak. So I think your body's just reacting to that. And I think it's about being able to look at it and not say this is something negative. It's not I'm feeling fear right now. It's not a negative thing that I'm having a hard time sleeping. It's just, my emotions communicating to me, like, we're about to take a risk. We're about to do something exciting or different or bold. And your body is just kind of feeling that process, which is there's no problem with that at all, actually.
Okay, I love that you just normalized my experience back for me. Now, if I were to get to, because I've thought about this, I'm like, why is it that I get these big feelings before an event, public speaking? And, one of my stories that I recognize is like, I really want them to like me. Like, I want to create impact. I want to make a difference. I want to know that, like, by the time I leave the event, people are like, okay, whatever she said really moved me. It touched me. It created a change. And there's like a real fear of that not happening. Now, is there a way, or is there something that we can tell ourselves? I mean, I'm asking on a personal level, but really, I think this is a collective experience. Is there something we can tell ourselves when we recognize the story behind fear being, I want to be liked, I want to be approved of, I want to get recognition? What can we tell ourselves in those moments?
Can I put you on the spot?
Please. Oh, is this a therapy session? Let's see. No,
Why do you personally, I think wanting to be liked is a very universal experience. So why do you personally need or want to be liked so much? Or you can cover this in whatever sheet you want, but that's an important question to ask.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And I'm all about getting like real and vulnerable. I don't try to like hide behind my screen. Like, I'm just as human as everybody else, I think we all want to be liked. Why do I want to be liked? Why do I want that approval? Because I feel like it gives me, it makes me relevant. It makes me feel like I matter. And on a deeper level, there's that feeling of being seen, being heard. And if we're really going into like the layers, obviously it comes from childhood stuff. It comes from, thank God I have very loving parents. We grew up in a house that was full of affection and love, and it was an Israeli home. That said, my parents didn't receive the tools that I now try to implement with my kids, called like conscious parenting. Like, and so when I was having big feelings, they didn't know how to handle that. So there was not really a feeling seen, a feeling heard. And I think part of me is compensating for, some of what I didn't receive as a child.
Wow. First of all, I love to say thank you so much. Thank you for being vulnerable with us, and for everybody on here, and for everybody that's going to hear this. It's so important. And you're making this such a normal experience to talk about. So I appreciate that a lot. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with both of those things. And I asked you that because there isn't necessarily a universal response to this very universal experience. It's a personal response. So you have to look at yourself and say, before you get up for that speech, I am relevant no matter what. Relevant regardless of whether or not anybody in this audience receives me and receives the words I say. I know I'm relevant. And that just like eases your system, because you spoke directly to the heart of the matter. And the other thing is, when it comes to, the childhood stuff and recognizing the way that we were raised, recognizing like I'm having a big emotion right now, that's another way that you can respond to yourself and say, big emotions are okay. Big emotions are okay. Having a sleepless night, you know what? That's okay. I'm just going to hold myself through this, and I'm allowed to toss and turn, and I'm going to be with myself as I have anxiety. And I'm so good with it because I'm here and I love myself, and I can be with myself through any part of this experience right now. So I think in terms of like how to make that generalizable, ask yourself, what's going on for me? Like, why do I personally feel this way right now? And then you can speak to the heart of the matter, which makes the whole process of anxiety way smoother. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And people hear us saying like, I love that. I'm relevant no matter what. So clearly it's resonating.
Yeah.
Now, at what point would you say like someone who experiences anxiety, at what point do they need therapy? Because if we all experience it, right? Like I feel the fear and I do things anyways. And thank God, like that's a gift that I've been given.
Amazing.
Which is amazing.
That is I love it. Yes.
Thank God. Thank God. And at the same time, I'm like, okay, I think like the type of anxiety, the type of fear that I feel is relatively normal to the human experience. But at what point does it become, I don't know, we would call it like chronic or clinically diagnosed? Like at what point does a person need therapy for it?
Yeah. So I think generally speaking, number one, if you feel like you can't get through it on your own. Number two, if it's stopping you from living the life that you want to live, whatever capacity that is. I know for myself, I experience human emotion of anxiety as well, like we all do. There are times in my life where I'm like so good with it and I'm like, I know exactly what to do. And like, yalla, we're fine. And there are times in my life where I'm like, I need additional support. I need somebody to help guide me through, either because it's creating some sort of roadblock that I want to work through, or it's because I need an extra set of like eyes. I need another heart to like work through it with me. If I feel like I can't do it alone or it's stopping me from living any sort of part of my life, that's when I would know that I need to talk to somebody. And then there's also diagnostic criteria that a therapist can help go through with you. Because if you're not sure, like, is this something that I need therapy for? Like, the therapist will be able to ask you the right questions. Like, is it impacting your sleep most nights for the last, 6 months? Is it causing irritability? Is it causing you to have muscle tension? There's like so many different, specifics that a therapist can help you figure out if this is really getting in the way of your life or not, if you're not sure. So that's what I'd say.
So you mentioned that you have like normal episodes of anxiety. Like it's normal. And there's certain moments where you're able to like talk yourself through it and you know what to do. So what are some of the things that you do? Like, cause we'll cover the like spectrum of anxiety from like once in a while to people who experience it 24/7. Right.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things, the tools that you implement when you experience the like once in a while anxiety?
That's a good question. So like I said, first and foremost, I know that I have my people. Like if I have anxiety that feels like I need extra support, I will immediately go to therapy. Like I have my therapist like on call and he knows. And when I text him, he's like, all right, we're scheduled something this week. But when it's something that I can deal with on my own, I'm a big runner and I really believe in working out. For me, that is like, I need to get emotional energy out somehow. And that's one of the best ways that I do it. Even this morning, like I was feeling very stuck on a certain thing in my head. I went running and like, just like that, it like melted away. And I'm like, wow, this is something I talk about all the time. And I was actually working for me. So that's like a big thing. If I need like an immediate shift, I'm adding about being compassionate towards your feelings. Without a doubt, like that has to be the foundation. I've done a lot of work on this, like on my own too. Being able to label and be very compassionate towards my own emotional experience, not in a critical way, exactly, not in a judgmental way, exactly, not in a non-accepting way. Being able to really just say like, instead of why am I anxious right now? Like, oh, hey, anxiety, notice that you're here right now. And they can sound like very similar, but essentially they're really actually different ways of responding. One is like, get out, I want to push you away. And the other is like, I see you. I'm going to help you. Talk to me. What's going on? Come sit next to me. Tell me the story. And like working through it that way too.
Wow. I love that. So I'm wondering, cause like I was trained in narrative therapy. And over the last few years, I've also gotten really into IFS, internal family systems, which I think is like really taken on a lot of popularity over the last few years. And it's very powerful. And so like one of the things that I remember learning in my narrative therapy course was the importance of like externalizing the experience, right? Like, so for example, instead of saying I'm an anxious person, I'm just anxious, right? It's by externalizing it, we say, oh, I'm experiencing anxiety right now. So it almost like separates me, my essence, who I really am, from the experience itself. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, Can you give tools on how we can like reframe anxiety so we don't think like, oh, there's something wrong with me?
For sure. Yes, I love that. I used to teach mindfulness groups, or I would lead mindfulness groups, and there are 6 or 7 core mindfulness skills, but the first 2 are observe and describe. And whenever I would teach this part of the module, I'd tell everybody, how many of you have said in your life, I'm anxious, right? And everybody raised their hand, or I'm depressed, right? Or I'm so overwhelmed. And then I'd ask them to rephrase, and I'm like, you're not anxious, you're not depressed, you're not overwhelmed. For myself, I would say like, I'm Aliza, and I'm experiencing anxiety right now. Or I'm Aliza, and I'm noticing the emotion of sadness coming up inside of me, which makes a huge difference. Do you know the horse and the rider analogy?
No. Please share.
No. My fave. Okay, so basically a lot of people ask me like, how can I be separate from my emotions? If I'm separate, either I'm faking it, so I'm really having this emotional experience, so I can't tell myself that I'm not this way, or I'm suppressing it in some way if I'm telling myself I'm not this feeling. So we use an analogy called the horse and the rider. When a person is in a very like what we call wise mind state and really can take hold of their emotions and label them and understand them, work through them, they're in a space where they themselves are the rider. And the horse is your feelings and everything else that's going on around you. Now, what happens when you're riding a horse and you're terrified?
You hold on.
The horse knows.
Mm-hmm.
You're like holding back. The horse knows. The horse just can do whatever it wants. This I know from experience. So you best not be on that horse and have zero control. But oftentimes when we have emotional experience, we're like, okay, I'm out of here. I can't do this. Too much anxiety. And then it's like the horse or your emotions has total control over you. And then what happens? Your emotions or the horse takes you wherever it wants to go. So the rider has no control. The horse is the one in charge. And it's not the horse and the rider. It's like the horse and the rider is just like holding on for dear life. Okay. So when we're in a really good relationship with our feeling, maybe, beneath us or the things that are kind of driving our spirit, but we ourselves are the rider or the observer, then we can take hold of those emotions. We can show our feelings. I see you. I understand you, but this is what we're going to do. Right. So then you're the rider and you're holding the reins in a very responsible, grounded way. And then you say, okay, horse, we're going to go this way right now, or we're going to go that way right now. And your emotions work for you instead of against you, and they bring you to the place that you want to go.
I love that. I love that a lot because it feels like a metaphor that applies to every area of life. Like I think even just as a parent, like I have 2 little kids and one is a toddler, a 3-year-old. So I'm in that like age range where it's like big feelings all the time. And I feel often that I can just get like swept into his big feelings. Then we're both dysregulated, but if I'm hearing you and when we're both dysregulated, forget it. Like he's the horse and he's got me under and like, whew, it's just one big balagan, like one big mess. But when I'm able to like, first and foremost, like take a deep breath, remind myself it's okay. He's doing what he's meant to be doing. He's a 3-year-old. He's doing what he's meant to be doing. Then it's like, that just talking to myself first and reminding myself it's okay. All of a sudden my space gets bigger. I can hold space for him. And then we both regulate together, which is like the horse it reminds me of the horse and rider analogy.
Beautiful. Spot on. That's like an amazing, amazing way to apply it for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Let's talk about anxiety a little bit more. And then I also want to talk about like triggers, like how to cope with triggers and reactivity and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people come to me and they're like, I just can't sleep. I have a hard time falling asleep. It takes me hours to fall asleep. Would you say that's a result of anxiety, insomnia being a result of anxiety, or not always?
A lot of the time. Sometimes it's like very strictly behavioral and people are just like on pretty like messed up sleep schedules and don't have great sleep habits. But I can't actually think of a case that I've seen that had insomnia that was not related to some sort of anxiety or overthinking at night, to be very honest. So I think there's a lot of correlation between anxiety and sleep and a lot of mindfulness that I utilize and help people utilize in terms of navigating that. It's exactly like what we were saying. Sometimes people go into bed and it's like, this is my time to do a mental review of my day, but literally everything under the sun that I've ever thought about ever. and that's what I'm going to do in bed, and I'm going to hope I fall asleep. It's like watching a horror movie and hoping you're just going to like casually fall asleep. No, you're triggering yourself. You're triggering all your feelings. That's not the time. That is the time to regulate. That is the time to cool down, to calm down. You can do a mental review, but like if you're doing it in bed and you're reviewing everything under the sun, chances are it's not going to be a very restful experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen that a lot for sure.
Is there a technique? Because I know for me, I shared openly that for me, the anxiety or the fear arises before a big event, before public speaking, or like the night before. And I'm often laying there in bed and I'm like, the whole like counting sheep, focusing on my breath, listening to a guided meditation, like whatever it is to help me get to that place. But when the thoughts are racing, I can focus on on my breath for a certain amount of time, but then the thoughts take over again. Like, is there a technique that you implement to help in those moments, whether it's for falling asleep or even just like coping throughout one's day?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think it's twofold. I think it's what do we actually do in the moment at night to help us fall asleep? And then it's how do I build the mindfulness muscle or the meditation muscle? Because those are two different things. And if you're not building the meditation muscle like throughout your week, it's going to be very hard to just turn on a meditation and be able to focus your mind. So the first question, number one, like we did earlier in this conversation, it's really important to go to the root of it and ask yourself what's really bothering me here and how can I address that directly. So it's about this fear, maybe people are going to judge me, then it's being able to look back at yourself and say, I'm relevant no matter what. And I'm damn proud that I'm doing this talk tomorrow. I'm so proud of myself. That's it. And being able to kind of redirect those thoughts over and over again. And then the second part is how do I actually tolerate the distress and how do I navigate my own thoughts so that I can fall asleep? I use meditation. It is the only thing, I think, that really gets me through like really tough like thought struggles.
Yeah.
But I will say if I'm not practicing my meditation practice like throughout the week, I can't do it at night. Like it's a lot harder. It's like going to the gym and thinking you can lift like, incredible amounts of weight without actually trying to build up to it.
Yeah.
Why can't I do this? I should be able to. Well, if you haven't been practicing all month, like chances are you're not going to be able to right now. But if you practice all month, when you need to do it, you're going to be able to do it. And you're going to be able to use meditation to really like train your mind and to be able to get through the thoughts.
100%.
Yeah. So meditation is what works for me.
Most. Me too. Meditation has changed my life. And just day to day, if I feel the big feelings, I'll literally go into my like Zen den on my meditation pillow and just reconnect with my breath. And it's really profound to see what happens. Like, I think people try to like avoid and escape and run away by like shopping or drinking or eating or whatever it is. But really coming back to the self has, for me as well, been a game changer. Okay. Now let's talk about triggers for a second. As far as like being triggered or becoming reactive, or you know what, before we go there, I actually have one more question about anxiety. Let's see what comes. But would you say that chronic anxiety, is it genetic?
Certainly can be. More than it is, I can't say more than it is genetic because I don't know the exact, percentages, but the same way that it can be genetic, it can also be environmental, meaning if we grew up in a very anxious environment, okay, let's say dad was super anxious or mom was super anxious or all your siblings had anxiety disorders that were untreated, whatever it is, we can actually grow up and have that kind of be the lens through which we see and experience life. So if every time, somebody in my family, something wasn't exactly put away the way it needed to be, and then it became a crisis, and nobody was allowed to go to sleep until everything was put away perfectly, to me, that's how I think the world works. So obviously, as we're kids, right, our brains are super impressionable, very plastic, and we see an experience, and then it gets coded in our brains as this is the only reality of life. So yes, there is a genetic component, but there's also a very environmental component. We call this the biosocial theory. So it's not only about our biology, but it's also the social environment in which we grew up. These things can very much impact us. And and we can kind of experience like anxiety is the only way that I can do life until somebody actually gets in there and tells you otherwise, and you learn new patterns about how to respond to life stressors without the same responses that we had when we were kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Now, so okay, I want to give you like an example of a client of mine who came to me, and through some unpacking of his childhood, we discovered that a lot of his perfectionist nature is related to his mother's chronic anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't consider this particular client of mine to be an anxious person in general. They're actually like pretty chill, calm demeanor, but comes from an upbringing where there was just anxiety all over the place. Would you, so as far as like how growing up with anxiety, how that can manifest in a child, it's not always that it manifests as anxiety in the child, right? It can manifest as a plethora of other things, no?
100%. Oppositional defiance, depression, social anxiety, specific OCD that people have never even heard of, illness anxiety. It can really take on a life of its own because we're all so different. So you and I, Ayelet, we can be in the same room experiencing the same thing, and it goes through my filter and it goes through yours, and that can look extraordinarily different even though we objectively witness the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So also for sure.
Wow. Amazing. Okay. So now let's switch gears and let's talk about triggers for a second. Why is it that some things trigger us and some things don't? Like what can we say about the things that do trigger us?
So much to say about the things that do trigger us. I'm curious, is the question more about like, how do we understand our triggers? How do we learn to identify our triggers? What do we do when we're triggered? There's so many amazing things to talk about on this topic.
So, okay, fine. So because this is like an open, vulnerable conversation, I'll share about myself because I feel that by sharing about myself, it'll resonate with everybody else. But like, obviously, thank God I have an amazing husband and we have a really great marriage. We're a great team, but marriage is marriage and there's no marriage that's perfect and there's no marriage that's going to come without its triggers. And so, sometimes I'm like curious, I'm like, why is it that this particular thing triggered me? Whereas like other things might trigger another woman, but that other things don't trigger me. Like where do our triggers come from?
Okay. So I love the question. Our triggers in marriage and in intimate relationships are unparalleled. They're like no other. Like no other. Have you heard of the Imago?
Yeah.
What do you know about the Imago?
I mean, I'm not an expert in it. I have some of the books, you know what I mean? And like in our first year of marriage, when things were like, we were really merging our cultures and, everything was coming together. We got every book and we'd read these books together. So I'm not an expert in it, but I have some of the books. So as far as like what I know, I wouldn't even have me like answer that question.
Okay. So basically in Harville Hendricks, forgive me if I'm like getting any of these words wrong. It's been a while since I read it. I think it's Harville Hendricks. Mm-hmm. I think the book is called Getting What You Want. And I think it's the Imago theory. I'm not sure about any of those things.
You're right about all three.
Okay, great. And then if I get the theory wrong, you can also correct me because it's been a minute. But essentially what happens is that we seek out, usually we end up marrying the person that we think is going to be the opposite of all the problems we had in our childhood. And we're like, great, this guy is perfection. He's absolutely not going to bring up any of my childhood triggers because I have gone through enough life and enough relationships and enough of my own work to know that I will not marry somebody who does that. And then we have this like little blissful period, and then all of a sudden they like start to change and adapt, and everything starts to hit us, and we're like, oh my God, you are everything I tried to run away from, and now I'm tethered to you for eternity, hopefully, and now we really have to figure it out. So why are we triggered in marriages? I don't know. I can't tell you why anybody's triggered. I can't tell you why any of us have to go through pain ever. What I can say is that when we are triggered, it's an opportunity to do the work, because at the end of the day, we're the only ones that do the work for ourselves, right? And like hopefully we're in a healthy marriage that we could talk about it with our partners and we can work through it together and we can get support if we need to. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if I am being triggered, it's something that I have to do and change within me. Either it's a boundary I have to create, it's something that I have to vulnerably express, or it's actually a strength that I need to build. Because I've been weak in this area for so long, and now this person's bringing it out of me, and like I have to learn how to stand up for myself here, or I have to learn how to be vulnerable here and ask for help. I hate asking for help, right? Or whatever it is. So I can't say exactly why we are living in a world where we do have to experience triggers and pain, period. But what I will say is that when we do, always, period, no matter what, across the board, it's an opportunity for us to grow in a certain way. So the question is, how do we do that? So I think overarching, like that's kind of like the theme. And then why do our partners trigger us? And why am I triggered by some things and you're not? And that's because we all have like vastly different life experiences, and we have different things also that we need to bring to the world. So it's possible that as like you bring a lot of like your own mindset work to the world, and you inspire so many people with your work and with your own growth, maybe, and I hope you never have another trigger going to day in your life, but maybe you're going to have a trigger about about mindset, so that you can work through it and that you can share that wisdom with the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I reconcile my own growth because I don't have like real answers about why people go through pain.
It's a big question. Yeah. Yeah. It's a big question to answer. You know, I think just from my own experience, you know, I feel like, I spent 6 years in India before coming to live in Israel. And, you know, we were meditating for hours every single day. And it was next level, just like really getting to know my parts at their core and why I do what I do. And, you know, I remember coming into like the dating process and like deciding now I'm ready to be married. And I was convinced that because I had done all that inner work, that I would fly through marriage with like,
no triggers for me, thank you.
No triggers for me, thank you. I've done the work. I've done my time. Now I'm ready to just sail.
Yeah.
And it was like the biggest smack in the face in our first year of marriage. It was like, really, we had, you know, my husband and I have spoken live about it because we think it's like, it's something that's so hush hush. And we don't want it to be such like a stigma, like such a like, oh, there's something wrong with us because we had a hard first year of marriage, you know, but one of the things that became clear to me was when I was or am triggered by my partner, I take it as an opportunity to go into myself and understand like, oh, okay, so clearly there's a need that's not being met. And how can I go in and reparent that need? How can I take responsibility for those parts that are probably acting from, you know, my inner 4-year-old, my inner 5-year-old who didn't have those needs met. And now I'm expecting my partner to meet those needs. And so we get triggered and say, not just in marriage, but I think also in friendships, in family dynamics, right? There's like needs that are not being met. So is there a conversation that you have with, I don't know what language you use, whether it's your inner child, your parts, your experiences, right? Is there a conversation that you have when you feel like, oh, this friend of mine, my roommate triggered me, my husband triggered me, my mom triggered me, whatever it is? Is there a conversation? You know, I know we spoke about compassion earlier, but is there like language around how you can speak to those parts in the moment of being triggered so that we don't always rely or depend on the person who triggered us to come in and be the savior?
All the time. I talk to myself literally all the time. And sometimes I don't when I'm meditating and I'm like, okay, we can quiet the voice now and we can just be. But I am constantly in conversation with myself because, you know, what I alluded to earlier is like nobody else in this universe is going to fix your triggers for you. Nobody else is going to regulate your system for you. Your emotions are your responsibility and your relationships are your responsibility. Your relationship with yourself too. So if you're in a relationship with somebody else that's hurting you, it's your job to protect yourself and get out. But I talk to myself a ton, and I definitely do it with a compassionate tone. I've had to work a lot on that. People thought, but whether it's a trigger from somebody in my family, or a trigger from a friend or from a no longer friend or a coworker or a patient. Like I'm in deep conversation all the time. So it's kind of like it's part of the job. I have to do that conversation and that talking. But I'll say, okay, first of all, it's going to be okay. No matter what you're feeling, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. We're going to get to the other side, which helps me just regulate and stay in the moment, in the feeling. And then I have a deep conversation to say, what's going on? Talk to me. Like, what is happening here? And I will sometimes even like invite my emotions to sit with me so that they don't feel exiled and they don't feel like they don't have a place here. And I'll just let them hang out for a little bit, for as long as they need to, for as long as we're in the conversation, or even if I need to like get back to the moment and I can't be talking to it, I'll say like, come, like, stay here with me, like you're okay. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I often like with myself and also with my clients, like I use the metaphor of like a tea party. So see all your parts, all your emotions, they're sitting together at a tea party, and they're doing their thing. They're doing their job. They're doing what they're meant to be doing. Like fear is meant to feel afraid. Anxiety is meant to feel anxious, so guilt is meant to feel guilty, whatever it is. Like, and so I often try to like pinpoint what is the loudest voice at the tea party? Like, what's the loudest emotion in the room? And then I'll use that part and like to have a conversation with, and be, like you said, I love that. Like, come sit, because clearly that part wants to feel heard, wants to feel seen. And if it's acting up, it means that it wants to be seen and heard even more. So, I try to come in and be that parent that, my friend can't be, my husband can't be, sometimes my therapist can't be, right? So that's awesome. Someone's asking, how could one deal with a block of emotions? I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you understand the question?
Numbness is my guess, like blocked out emotions. So the experience of, I actually tell people to track their experience of numbness the way that they would track any other feeling. Not being able to quite understand every type of emotion. Yeah, I mean, Therapy 101. I start people from the ABCs. Like, do you know how to label your emotions? Do you know what they all look like? Do you know how they all show up in your body? Do you know what they all sound like? Like, I literally have lists right here, like pages of emotions and how to understand each one of them. Because people don't have any education. We learn math, we learn history, we learn all the stuff, but nobody said this is the way anger shows up in your body. So when you have it, you'll be able to know it. But emotional awareness is very big. Meditation is really helpful for getting through numbness. Checking in with yourself, therapy, these are all ways to work through emotional blocks.
Right. Yeah. And I also, I'm wondering, like, is it important to really be able to pinpoint every single type of emotion? Because I feel like there's a variation of every type of emotion. Or can we say that there's like an overarching 5 emotions? I don't know, 5, 10, arbitrary number I'm throwing out there. Can we pinpoint like the umbrella emotions, and is that enough? Like, oh, fear, love, whatever it is.
It's definitely enough. It's definitely enough, and all people are different, and all people need different things. There are some people, a lot of people that I work with who just don't have language around their emotions. So when they have any sort of trigger, it all feels the same. So no matter what's going on, the emotion that they could label is overwhelmed. Well, are you overwhelmed with what? Are you overwhelmed with shame, with guilt, with fear, with anxiety? So for some people, it's actually very helpful to be able to put words to an experience. And I go through like all the different ways of experiencing an emotion. First of all, what's the umbrella, then what are the specific words? What are the thoughts attached to it? What are the triggers of this emotion? Where does it show up in your body? What does this emotion make you want to do? This is something that a lot of people miss. If I'm anxious, it usually means I'm going to want to avoid something. If I'm angry, I'm going to want to lash out. What are the after effects of acting on these emotions? Feeling wheel, that's super helpful. DBT has a lot of great. Anyway, I'm getting very clinical here. But I think that there are like certain people that gain a lot from being able to understand their emotion from a more concrete standpoint, because knowledge is power. So if I can know what's happening inside of me, then we go back to the horse and the rider analogy. I'll be able to direct my horse lovingly, without fear, without overwhelm, and without letting the emotions completely take over. So in short, people need different things for 100%. And for some people, being able to learn more about their emotional experience is very helpful.
Wow. it's funny. It's like, it's for so many people. And sometimes I love doing inner work. Like for me, it's my life. I'm obsessed with it. It's like my reason for living, and it's why it's why I'm in this position to like help other people too. Thank God. But it's scary. Like it is scary to go in and not just like admit that this feeling is there, but to really uncover its story, why it exists in the first place. And so, I had an experience like a couple months ago where I was sitting in my balcony, I was doing my meditation, and it was just one of those moments where like stuff was coming up. And for whatever reason, I was getting a lot of clarity into like the deep, dark places within me.
Yeah.
And as soon as I touched the like raw and tender places, I instantly like stood up and like walked away. Like I did not want to go there in that moment. And this is coming from someone who's like spent a decade and a half in meditation, doing inner work, trying to become clear about my inner world. What happened there? Like, why is it that in that moment of really touching a sore, like a raw emotion, I literally just, my mind avoided it. I got up and walked away.
Protective measure. That was your system saying, we're not ready right now. And maybe tomorrow you will be ready. Maybe after this call, you will be ready. That's why I always start off, you ask me, what's the language I use with myself? The first thing I say is, whatever it is, whatever this emotional experience is, I will be able to get through it. I will be able to feel it. Because for me, that's what I need to know that I can proceed. And yes, somebody said, thank you for sharing. Really, thank you for sharing. That was very vulnerable. And our internal worlds can be terrifying. Like, I don't know, it can be 30 years of like stuff. Okay. But it's our own stuff. So like we can talk about other people's stuff, but it's our own stuff. And 30 years of that just like locked in a cute little box, like shoved away, and then you open it and that can be totally terrifying for sure.
Yeah.
And we do that, we get up and we walk away when we're not entirely positive that we're ready to go there, which is why we block out certain emotional experiences at the moment too. And that's okay. And we say like, thank you for protecting me, system. I'm going to try because I believe in myself to get through it. And if you need to protect me again, I'm going to listen to your message. And sometimes I'll be able to respond to you and say, I'm going to sit here and hold this feeling for even a couple minutes. Or I'll say, you're right, it's not the right time for me. And I'm going to pause, but thank you for at least opening the door. I've looked inside,
I love that.
So yeah, it's important to honor your experience. Again, it doesn't dictate exactly what you do. And it's not to say that you'll never go back to that place. Like I said, maybe you'll go back after this, but we can honor it and still make the choice about what we want to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of some of like the work that they had us do when I was in India, where we would spend hours and hours and hours every day just writing about our childhood, every memory, every single memory. We write it down, and then we'd have to sit across another person who we've never met before, and we'd read these pages. It would take hours. I'm talking hours. Yeah. Yeah. Like full, just no filter, no. And this type of thing, when I say like the worst place your mind could possibly go, I've heard stories from people's experiences. Your mind can't even go to the places of people's experiences that I heard and witnessed just through this exercise. And there's a process of like recognizing, meaning like there's the experience itself from childhood. And then there's the meaning that we attach to the experience. But often the experience itself, like the facts, are not the same as the story that we attach to the facts. Like just because when I was 8 years old, my childhood crush, Tommy, didn't like me back does not mean that I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. Right. Yeah. And so in India, they took us through this process of recognizing the experience, like rewriting it accurately, meaning, okay, is it true that Tommy didn't like me? Yes. Does it mean that I'm not lovable? No. And then we'd have to like go back in through this meditative process and relive all of the experiences until we like got to a place where we were able to laugh about them, Now, in your work, because I've heard a number of different opinions about this type of process of going back, reliving, because it could really be like re-triggering and set someone down a spiral. like a really like re-traumatizing spiral. How important is it? And do you implement this in your work? And how important is it to like go back into the experience itself, relive it, and then rewrite it in order to actually change the neural pathways that got created at the time?
First of all, you're making me want to get on a plane and go to India right now.
Don't do it. Don't do it. That's not my goal.
I'm not gonna. No, I'm very happy in New York City, but I've always wanted to just go to India and sit in an ashram for like a very long time. But anyway, the trauma work is very important. It depends how much it's impacting your life right now. All forms of like evidence-based trauma work do incorporate some sort of going backwards, telling your story, and then rewriting it. TFCBT, CPT, prolonged exposure, all of them. Now, there's two things. I tell people that when you do your trauma work, it's a lot more important than how quickly you do your trauma work. You have to be ready. And you have to be confident enough that you're going through it with a safe person. And from a standpoint of feeling more empowered to look at that story in a way that's not going to crush you. Because we do not want to do like a re-trauma. That's not the goal of trauma therapy. And I also say that oftentimes, like you said, like going through those really hard moments is not what broke you. And oftentimes it's that you had to go through it alone. That was the real trauma in and of it. Right? So going through the trauma didn't break you, going through it alone did. And so that able to reach a point in your life, in your adult life, when you can share it with somebody, have another human being witness your pain, experience it with you, and talk about which parts were really painful, how you can rewrite the story or see the story through a lot, very different eyes. That can be so healing in and of itself. Anything that stays stuck inside of us ends up clogging up our emotional system. So if we can talk about it with a safe person and it's the right time, it can be very freeing.
Wow. Do you believe that there is a way forward without needing to go backwards? Meaning, is there the possibility for emotional freedom in just doing things that pertain to the future without needing to revisit our past experiences? Is that possible, in your opinion?
I think at times, for sure. I'm a behavioral therapist, so it's not my main MO to start off session one, tell me about your childhood. We're going to talk about your childhood for the next 6 months period. That's not really how I roll. But your childhood impacted who you are. You kind of have to talk about it. You kind of have to go there and be able to look it in the eye, because that very much has an impact on who you are today. And it's to varying degrees. For some people, it could just be one simple conversation. Tommy not liking me made me feel unlovable. I created this cognition in my head that I'm never going to put myself out there ever again. And I'm 29 and I still don't want to date. Dating feels horrible for me. Okay, well let's go back to that part inside of you, and we have to have a conversation with it, because it's stopping you from living right now. And then we don't talk about Tommy ever again. We talk about you right now. We talk about how you go on dates, you show up with your best self, and how you take risks, and how you have social anxiety exposures all the time. Nobody even knows you have social anxiety anymore because you could do all the things. And then it can become a very future oriented conversation.
I totally hear that. It's just interesting because I've heard so many people are like, no, you never go back into reliving the story because it can re-trigger and re-traumatize. And I don't know, I love that you're just it really depends on the person and the level of safety that they're experiencing. And, and I think also just having a person recognize, is assuming that their therapist or whoever it is, their mentor, their rabbi, whoever it is, assuming that it's someone who they really, really trust and can get vulnerable with. Like you said, that feeling of, I'm not in this, even if the trauma happened years and years and years ago, just by going back to it from an adult perspective with someone who you feel held by, I think I'm not in this alone is healing in and of itself.
Yeah.
Amazing.
For sure. Yeah. Actually, I have something in 4 minutes, but this was such an incredible conversation. I feel like there's so much more we have to go over.
There's so much more. So amazing, Aliza. Thank you so much. This was really, really, really insightful.
Fabulous. It was so great meeting you, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Yeah, please God. Have a great day. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Take care.
If you enjoyed this episode and would like more manifestation inspiration, tune in every Monday for a new episode. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out on an episode. What you get out of this show means the world to me, so I invite you to leave an honest review. If you want more, you can follow me on social media at Ayelet Polonsky. I also have a number of virtual courses to offer if you're ready to take this material to the next level and start embodying a manifestation mindset. I teach you how to heal past trauma, experience the most joy out of life, and rewrite your future so you can feel good more often. Simply head on over to ayeletpolonsky.com for a variety of resources you can start taking advantage of immediately. See you next week. And as always, think big and happy manifesting.